Chapter 746. First step: summoning the undying chain and the cruel sight. Sunny bypassed using either the elevator or the stairs, and stepped through the shadows to leave the underground dojo behind. No matter what kind of an abomination had found its way into his home, the creature was going to regret it dearly. For a moment, however, Sunny felt a hint of hesitation. He did not know what had transpired in the waking world during his absence. After all, he had left for the Night Temple 7 months ago and had not been back since. For all Sunny knew, humanity might have fallen in that time. The whole city could have been destroyed, with endless hordes of nightmare creatures stalking the desolate ruins. Any kind of horror could have been hiding in his living room. Well, so what? It is still my living room. No matter what state the waking world was in, anyone and anything thinking that they could simply make themselves at home in a home that belonged to Sunny would have to reconsider their life choices. Ready for battle, he appeared from the shadows and froze. The exhilarated howl grew much louder above ground, but it was not produced by a nightmare creature. Instead, it was produced by Effie. With beads of condensation still glistening on her olive skin, the huntress was standing in the center of the room and howling like a maniac. Behind her, the door of the guest bedroom was taken off the hinges, complete with a large piece of the wall and a chunk of the ceiling. That wall was reinforced with armored alloy, damn it. Sunny stared at his friend in shock, then slowly blinked. Wait, Effie is standing. Indeed, the young woman was standing tall, her long legs appearing healthy and strong. There was no wheelchair in sight. In fact, her whole appearance had changed. The weak, unhealthy girl with pale skin stretching over brittle bones and a twisted spine was gone. Instead, Effie looked almost like she did in the dream realm, tall, attractive, with sparkling hazel eyes and perfectly defined, lean muscles rolling under the dewy olive skin. She was radiating an infectious feeling of vitality and vigor. Everything about her was screaming of strength, potency, and power. The only thing that changed was the length and cut of her hair, as well as the degree of her tan. Before Sunny could realize it, a joyous smile crept up on his face. Of course, the ascension was a miraculous process. It merged the physical and the spirit bodies together, taking the best parts and perfecting both. Even the lost could return from the dream realm and live in the real world once more after conquering the second nightmare. Effie's disability was no exception to this magical rule. That was the reason why she had always strived to become a master, to begin with. A moment later, Effie ended her triumphant howl on a high note and turned around, finally noticing him. Her eyes shined. She took a step forward and grinned brightly. "Doofus, I'm walking." Sunny wanted to say something, but then forced himself to look away. He cleared his throat. "Congratulations. I am very happy for you, I am. But please, can you put something on?" Effie blinked a couple of times, then looked down. In all the excitement, she had completely forgotten to dress after climbing out of the sleeping pod. Her grin turned a little sheepish. "Ah well, pretend you didn't see anything." Hearing the young woman hurriedly stomp away, Sunny let out a heavy sigh. "I will try." Effie's voice resounded from the guest bedroom. "Sunny." He turned his head slightly. "What?" For a moment there was silence. "Sorry about the doors and the walls." Sunny grimaced. "It's not a big wait, walls, as in multiple walls. What the hell did you do?" While Effie was clothing herself, Sunny looked around his house. It didn't change much. In the 7 months that passed since his departure, the cleaning systems had done a good job of keeping everything presentable. If not for the broken door of the guest bedroom and the debris of the collapsed wall laying on the floor, he could have thought that he had left only yesterday. It was a strange feeling. So much had happened, so much had changed. He had changed most of all. He was a master now, and that was perhaps not the greatest transformation Sunny had gone through after living through the Night Temple and the nightmare. And yet here in the waking world, everything was the same. Everything was unchanged. He did not know how to feel about it. The permanence and safety of his home were very comforting, but they also filled him with a deep sense of resentment for some reason. The contradiction persisted, making him feel confused. Shaking his head, Sunny retrieved his communicator from where he had left it and turned it online. There was a backlog of unanswered messages he was going to have to go through, but right now, that did not matter. Only the last message caught his attention. It was from Cassie, containing only a couple of words. "I'm fine." He quickly sent a response and then dialed Kai. His friend answered the call immediately, as if he was waiting for it. The charming young man was already dressed, although his gorgeous hair was wet and messy. In the background, multiple people in stylish business suits were feverishly running around with slightly shell-shocked looks on their faces. They were probably the representatives of his agency and PR team. Kai smiled. "Sunny, what happened? How did the nightmare end? Is everyone all right?" Sunny lingered for a moment. "I am all right. Effie and Cassie are alive and well too. After you dealt with Severax, everything went smoothly." The young man sighed with relief. "Thank the gods, but what about?" He grew silent, not wishing to say Mordred's name aloud. Then Kai shook his head. "Actually, don't answer. I'll be there in 10 minutes. The image on the screen of the communicator shifted and then cut off. The last thing Sunny heard was someone's voice yelping. "Mr. Knight, what do you mean, step away from the window?" Sunny lowered the communicator and smiled. A piece of the broken wall caught his eye, laying on the kitchen table. Everything else was perfectly clean and spotless. As Sunny stared at the piece of debris with displeasure, a dark tentacle rose from below and easily swatted it to the floor. Usually, it would have taken Kai a lot longer to fly across the city to reach the Tranquil Terrace district. Not that he would have. But today, the famous idol neglected his habit of staying low and out of sight. It seemed that his speed increased tremendously, as well because 10 minutes later he was already at Sunny's door. Maybe because of that, there was no crowd of paparazzi following him. As they waited for Cassie, Effie rummaged through the empty refrigerator, then walked away from it with a disappointed sigh. "There's no food." Sunny, who was evaluating the damage the boisterous huntress had done to the guest bedroom, glanced at her darkly. "We've been gone for months. What did you expect?" Effie made a sad face, then shrugged. "But I'm hungry." Sunny let out an exasperated breath. "I have some synth paste if you want." She shuddered and opened her mouth to retort, but at that moment there was a knock on the door. If not for the haughty shadow standing guard outside, reluctantly of course, since mundane tasks such as this were grossly beneath it, Sunny would have tensed up. However, he already knew that it was Cassie. The blind girl walked inside, froze for a moment, then raised a deliciously smelling package. "I brought food." Effie threw a quick glance at Kai and grinned. "See, someone has some sense." She did not stare at the archer for long, though. Kai had always been ridiculously charming, but after becoming a master, his looks assumed an almost hypnotizing quality. It was easy to get distracted if one stared at him for too long. In fact, every one of them became much better looking, albeit to a different degree. After studying Kai and Cassie for a bit, Sunny couldn't help but shake his head ruefully, a stunned expression on his face. He finally understood why Master Jet had called herself average when they first met, at least as far as ascended went. Still, it felt wrong to put the word average in one sentence with someone like her. Jet possessed an intangible quality that no one he had ever met was able to match. The four of them were masters too now, but they were far away from matching her arresting presence. And Sunny himself. He wasn't sure that he qualified to be considered a flower boy, as Soul Reaper had once predicted, but even he couldn't call himself unassuming anymore. The scrawny kid from the outskirts was gone. Instead, a young man with porcelain skin and striking black eyes took his place. Deep in their darkness, visible only to Sunny himself, golden threads of Weaver's forbidden legacy glowed with the flame of divinity. The four of them settled around the table and shared a silent meal. Despite the fact that they should have been exhilarated by their triumph over the nightmare, none of the four seemed too joyous. Well, except for Effie, who couldn't stop grinning and stealing glances at her pristine, vigorous body. The huntress was overflowing with giddiness. The other three, however, just felt hurt, tired, and empty. And why wouldn't they be? Inside the nightmare, there was no time for weakness. They had to carry on no matter how deep the wounds dealt to their souls cut. Now that the danger had passed and the members of the cohort were back in the real world, all those invisible scars were starting to make their presence known. The slaughterhouse of the Red Colosseum, the nightmares, the assault on the Ivory City, all of it was slowly coming back to haunt Sunny. The others had their share of demons to quell, no doubt. After a while, Kai poured himself a cup of tea, looked at Sunny, and asked with uncertainty, "So, what happened? I don't remember much after being swallowed by Severax." Effie dropped her fork and stared at the archer with a stunned expression. "Swallowed what? You were swallowed by the dragon." Kai smiled with embarrassment. "Oh, not really. I just sort of jumped into his mouth, because I didn't know how else to kill him." The Effie blinked a few times but didn't say anything. She even forgot about her food for a moment. Sunny looked down, then sighed. "Nothing really happened. I managed to stall the fifth challenger for a while. He fell for my deception because he had assumed that I would not trust anyone with the knives, I think. After you killed the dragon, there was no real reason for him to stay. He left to salvage at least some rewards before the nightmare ended, and I crossed to the Ivory Island." He grew quiet for a few moments, and then added, "When Severus died, one of the two remaining chains that held it in place broke. Then the other one did too. The tower rose into the sky, and as it did, the force holding the islands afloat shifted, creating the crushing. That is how chained isles came to be. Hope escaped, and the nightmare ended." A somber silence settled over the table. After a while, Cassie asked, So Lord Noctis fell too?" Sunny slowly nodded. "Yes, he asked me to give him the obsidian knife and broke the last chain himself." Effie sighed, then glanced at the cup of tea in front of her. "Damn it, I wish we had something stronger to drink in his honor. Some wine, maybe. Noctis, he was a devious, wicked, two-faced lunatic, but he was also great, in more than one sense. You know." She smiled wistfully and then shook her head. "Isn't it strange? Mourning a figment of the spell, they weren't real after all." Sunny looked down, knowing that Effie was not only talking about Noctis. Then the corners of his mouth curled upward. He raised his cup of tea and smiled. "Actually, I think that enjoying some tea is what he would have wanted us to do. That was his plan, you know. Win a war against the immortal saints, defy the gods, release the demon of desire from her prison, and then have a cup of tea." Sunny took a sip and then let out a satisfied sigh. "So let's relax and do exactly that. We deserve this much at least, don't you think?" Some time later, Sunny left the house and sat on the porch by himself. His thoughts were in disarray. So much had changed, so much had happened. So much was going to happen in the next few days as well. His life was inevitably going to transform, hopefully, for the better. However, there were many obstacles he was going to have to overcome, and many decisions he was going to have to make in order to avoid being destroyed by the changes instead. Although Sunny had grown considerably stronger, and obliterating him was not as easy anymore, there were still threats out there that he did not dare to face. He sighed and looked down. I am a master. The knowledge rested in his mind, but he was yet to truly comprehend it. Ascended had seemed so distant and glorious to him, once. Not quite demigods, but also not mere mortals anymore. But now, he was one of these venerated beings himself. He could feel inhuman power coursing through his veins. That was something he couldn't process that fast. And yet, time waited for no one. Sonny knew that there would be no opportunity to properly get used to his swiftly shifting circumstances. He had a lot to do, and he had to do it now. Just take it one step at a time. What did he have to do immediately? Call Aiko, for one. He had to let his business partner know that he was back and get an update on how Rain was doing. Then discover a way to contact the White Feather clan and find out about the fallout of the destruction of the Night Temple, although Cassie could handle that. Finally, get in touch with Master Jet. For better or worse, she was his handler and his point of contact with the government. If things turned from bad to worse with the great clans, the authorities were the only force influential enough to shield him, for a price, no doubt. Sonny grimaced. Not yet, I need to collect my thoughts first. He leaned back and studied the familiar, peaceful landscape of the Terrace district. Despite the fact that the great clans possessed incredible powers, it was not too easy to deal with Sonny and the other members of the cohort anymore. All four of them were masters now, and exceptional ones at that. Not only had they conquered the second nightmare, but they had also done it at an abnormally young age, and after entering the seed one measly year after awakening. The survivors of the Forgotten Shore were already famous, and this latest accomplishment was bound to stir up a real storm, both in the media and behind closed doors. Sonny would not be able to remain fully under the radar anymore. Not to mention that each of them received extremely powerful abilities. Effie's was, perhaps, the most remarkable in how useful it was. Sonny had expected the Huntress to receive another combat ability, but instead, her new power appeared to bolster her allies as long as they could see her. It was as though they were receiving a part of her phenomenal, comprehensive physical augmentation. Sonny had experienced that enhancement himself when Effie enthusiastically activated her new ability, and had to admit that it was powerful. Not comparable to what the young woman herself could accomplish, but still significant. What was even more amazing, it could be effortlessly shared with any number of people as long as they maintained the line of sight with the Huntress, without an additional cost in essence. That basically meant that any cohort, any force, and even any army could benefit tremendously from having Effie fight in their ranks. Of course, masters usually acted alone. There were simply not enough masters and too much for them to do to form full cohorts of Ascended. However, that did not mean that one could not build supporting teams of Awakened or even mundane soldiers around them. Sonny had seen exactly that when Master Jet arrived to contain the gate ahead of the government forces. So, Effie was about to get very, very popular among the great powers of humanity. Kai was in a similar situation, although for different reasons. His ascended ability was strange and a little bit frightening. None of them, not even Kai himself, had the chance to explore the full range of its capabilities. However, the potential of what it could achieve was vast. Basically, Kai's voice acquired a supernatural quality that compelled people who heard it to follow his commands. The result and the consequence depended on how much essence he poured into the compulsion and the target's resistance, as well as some other factors that no one understood. Direct commands were hard to force on people with strong willpower or high resistance to mind attacks. For example, if Kai commanded another Ascended to drop their weapon, they would be able to refuse the compulsion. However, their grip might grow weaker, and their attacks might grow slower. The same principle worked the other way around, too. The compulsion did not have to be aimed at an enemy. Kai could call upon his allies to fight with more fervor or to hold their ground no matter what. He could invoke any feeling he wanted in large groups of people, or lure them to their deaths like a siren. That ability made him incredibly valuable for those who held power, as well. The government propaganda machine especially was going to lose its collective mind over Nightingale and his enchanting voice. And there was more. Kai's aspect had evolved after he had faced and slain the ivory dragon. Instances like that were known to happen, but were also incredibly rare. His awakened aspect was now ascended, which made his previous abilities more potent and maybe even introduced new facets to them. The archer had no time to explore these changes yet, so his friends had no idea what the evolution entailed. They only knew that their friend had grown stronger, although perhaps in a way that few would notice. And then there was Cassie. Her new ability was perhaps the most obscure and esoteric. The blind girl herself described it as being able to perceive the world from a different perspective. In other words, she could now use someone else, or something else, to substitute her senses. She could smell through someone's nose, feel through someone's touch, and see through someone's eyes. While Cassie herself was still blind, she was able to look upon the world again and see what the recipient of the connection saw. The connection could be established with several mediums at the same time, as long as she had the mental capacity to withstand the flood of input. What was more disturbing was the fact that the medium did not necessarily have to acquiesce to the connection, or even be aware of it, although it took much less essence to sustain a connection with a willing recipient. Despite not being too flashy at first glance, that was an insidiously formidable ability. After all, knowledge was the origin of power, and Cassie could potentially become a vortex of it. There were a lot of uses for such an ability, from becoming the connective tissue between the commanders and the soldiers during a large-scale battle to establishing an invisible and undetectable spy network. Additionally, Cassie's first ability expanded once again, now allowing her to perceive not only attributes and aspect names, but also aspect abilities of other awakened. In short, she would be a boon to any clan, great clan, or branch of the government. However, Sunny knew that the blind girl was dead set on remaining independent and continuing to lead the Fire Keepers. Perhaps she would even get a chance. In light of all these revelations, his own ascended ability, shadow manifestation, seemed to have paled in comparison. But that was just if one did not look closer. Sunny suspected that his new ability was much more versatile, insidious, and powerful than that of the other three. And speaking of that, wasn't it time to get to know it better? For a while, Sunny silently experimented with his new power. Shadow manifestation was an interesting ability, especially when combined with the evolved shadow control. It was deceptively straightforward, but held so much depth that Sunny wasn't sure that he would be able to figure out all of its potential uses in a short span of time. The fundamental function of shadow manifestation was rather simple. It allowed him to turn shadows tangible. But the devil hid in the details. Now that Sunny enjoyed authority over all shadows, and not only his own, he could manipulate their shape and even make them move according to his will. However, that facet of his aspect had its caveats. Not all shadows were the same. Some were young and some were ancient. Some were deep and some were shallow. Most importantly, some belonged to inanimate objects and some belonged to living beings. Although Sunny enjoyed their respect and reverence, that did not mean that all shadows were going to submit to him implicitly. They simply chose to follow his commands due to his status as the master of shadows, as opposed to being forced to do it. That was not new to Sunny. He had already noticed this pattern of behavior when inviting wild shadows to enter the shadow lantern. Most did it of their own free will, but some obstinate ones refused his invitation. Now that the child of shadows attribute had evolved, Only the most ancient and deep of the wild shadows seemed reluctant to answer his call. However, not all shadows were wild. That was a term he decided to use when speaking about those of them that were cast by inanimate objects. If a shadow was cast by a living being and connected to a living soul, no amount of authority Sonny had could compel it to abandon or betray their source. So shadow control only allowed him to manipulate wild shadows. The deeper and older a shadow was, the more concentration it took to command it. He also experienced more strain when commanding distant shadows. Now that Sonny became an ascended devil, the reach of his control extended to almost 10 kilometers. His shadow sense, however, did not usually extend quite that far. His human mind would have been overloaded if it did. So while Sonny could potentially control shadows that were very far away, he simply had no way of sensing them. Unless they were his own shadows, of course, or those he perceived through them. And then came the actual shadow manifestation. Unlike shadow control, manifestation required him to expend essence. The shadows would remain tangible as long as he continued to sustain them with essence, and would return to their natural state if he stopped. This was both a blessing and a curse. For obvious reasons, Sonny would have preferred to keep his essence. However, there was an unexpected and incredible boon to this ability. Due to the fact that the manifested shadows were suffused with his essence, they assumed its property. In other words, all of them were akin to memories of the ascended rank in terms of durability and resilience. This meant that if Sonny shaped a shadow into a blade and manifested it, the blade would be comparable to an ascended memory in terms of both sturdiness and the damage it could do. But he was not only limited to creating weapons. Shadow manifestation offered him an incredible measure of utility. Since shadows were formless by nature, he could shape them into anything he wanted. He could create barriers, bridges, ropes, suits of armor. The only limitations were his imagination and his reservoir of essence. Hell, he could even create a saddle for Nightmare, or an entire house. Of course, nothing came without a cost. The more complex and condensed a shape was, the more essence it took to sustain it. Creating a simple shadow tentacle was not too hard, but imbuing it with enough solidity to cut through an enemy like a sword was much more taxing. Manifesting deep and ancient shadows also took a toll, although they were more powerful. And lastly, all the things he made tangible were able to move on their own, as long as their shape allowed it. A sword was not going to fly on its own, but a manifested shadow could move around and grab his enemies. That was not a very efficient form of attack in most cases, however. Each shadow possessed its own level of strength, which was usually not too high. Sonny was far away from being able to rip an awakened tyrant to shreds for now. And unless he really wanted to. By experimenting a little, he found out that he could enhance the might of the manifested shadows by pouring more essence into them. The more force he wanted to exert above their natural threshold, the more essence he had to burn. That would not have been too powerful in the hands of an average master. But Sonny was a devil. He had vastly more essence than almost any other master had at their disposal. If he really wanted to, he could exert truly monstrous strength through his manifested shadows. Even though that would be grossly inefficient in terms of essence expenditure, he felt very happy to have such an option. Who wouldn't want to rip enemies apart without having to lift a finger? Even if there were many easier and smarter ways to kill something, very few were as cool and as devious. Apart from the wild shadows, Sonny could also manifest his own. In fact, doing so was much easier, allowed him much better control, and demanded much less essence to be used. For a few moments, he imagined summoning Gloomy, Happy, Creepy, and Haughty, arming them with shadow blades and making them fight in his stead. What a sight that would be! However, after thinking for a bit, he decided that this was not a very good idea. There was a very simple reason for that. While tangible shadows could affect the real world, they could be affected in turn. Manifested shadows could damage his enemies, but could also be damaged instead. Since his shadows were deeply connected to his soul, making them vulnerable to physical attacks was a very stupid thing to do. Sunny did not even want to think about what would happen if one of them was destroyed. At most, they would be able to perform simple tasks that did not pose any risk. Overall, Sunny was very happy with his new aspect ability. It was powerful and versatile, providing him with potent means of both attack and defense, as well as incredible utility. What made him especially happy, though, was how perfectly it synergized with the shadow lantern. Shadow manifestation had only one apparent weakness: the fact that he would not always be surrounded by shadows. Without anything to manifest, its worth was almost non-existent, unless he wanted to risk his own shadows, of course. However, that weakness was made moot by the shadow lantern. With its help, Sunny could carry an infinite amount of shadows with him at all times. No matter where he went, he would never be without their assistance. He would never be a master without servants. Wherever Sunny went, a swarm of shadows would follow. Sunny remained on the porch for a while longer, thinking about nothing in particular. He wondered about the future and about the past. What had happened to the real Noctis? What had happened to the real Hope? What had really happened to her cursed kingdom? He had seen the corpses of Sevras and Sun Prince in the dream realm. However, Solving had still been alive. The obsidian and the ivory knives had never been used, hinting that the real events of the liberation of Hope had been both similar and vastly different from how they had transpired in the nightmare. Had Noctis succeeded in his ambition to make a deal with Weaver? Had the demon of fate helped him find a way to break the eternal shackles of Hope without using the knives? If so, had the sorcerer, perhaps, survived his mad rebellion? What price had he paid? Of course, Sunny knew that there were no answers to his questions. He was never going to learn the truth. The events he had lived through in the nightmare were too distant and shrouded in too much mystery for him to discover it. As he thought about all these things, a familiar figure suddenly appeared on the crosswalk. A teenage girl with pale skin and black hair was walking back from school, a somber expression on her face. Noticing Sunny, she froze for a second and then suddenly sprinted over. Halfway to the porch, Rain remembered herself and slowed down, awkwardly trying to hide her excitement. She stopped near Sunny, hesitated for a moment, and then hit him on the shoulder with her little fist. Where the hell have you been? Are you back? You were gone for so long." Sunny leaned back and grinned. "Hey, Rain, of course I am back, can't you see? As for where I was, I just visited a temple, then I went on a little cruise. Then I visited a couple of towers, spent some time in a theater, befriended a horse, lived in another temple for a while. Finally, I visited a very pretty city and got to know its rulers. Why? Did you miss me?" Rain stared at him for a few moments, then scoffed. "Me, huh? Why would I miss you of all people?" She grew silent, looked down, and then added shyly, "Well, maybe I did miss you, a tiny bit. My new tutor is a very respectable awakened, but he is not at all as fun as you." Sunny looked at her for a few moments, and then smiled. "An awakened, huh? What a pity, I am a master now." Rain froze and threw a shocked glance at him. "You are a master, as in an ascended. Wait, what?" His smile slowly grew smug. "Indeed I am. Do you know what that means?" She hesitated. "What?" Sunny leaned forward and said in a friendly tone, "Why, it means that my lessons will be much more expensive, of course." He laughed, then grew silent, and added after a short pause, "Oh, also, I might have missed you a tiny bit, too." A dark river flowed through a cavernous expanse of black stone. Fog nestled on the water, stifling its quiet murmurs and veiling everything in white. A lone source of light was traveling through the fog, tearing a path through it. It was a slender gondola cut from onyx, with a glass lantern hanging on its bow. A pristine white flame burned within the lantern, straining against the confines of its crystal prison. The fog opened up before the gondola and then silently closed behind. A young woman with silver hair and ivory skin was curled into a ball, sleeping on the bottom of the onyx boat. In the stark light of the lantern, her face seemed deathly pale and vulnerable. On the stern of the gondola stood a skeleton dressed in rags. He was working the oar, staring into the fog or at the young woman. Despite the fact that the skeleton had no lungs, no lips, and no tongue, he was humming a song. One day the gods will fall and reveal their lie. The one who sleeps will awaken to devour his children. Oh, and us all. That which was forgotten will be remembered and consume the world. Oh, all of us will dream the nightmare of the forgotten god. As he sang, the young woman stirred and then slowly opened her eyes. The skeleton grew silent, glanced at her, then said, "Good morning, creature. How have you slept?" She sat up straight and did not answer, staring at the skeleton with tired gray eyes. The boatman waited for a bit, then shrugged. "Are you feeling well? You have not been speaking much these past few weeks, creature. Has your mind finally gone?" The young woman remained silent, making the skeleton uncomfortable. He shook his head. Something about you feels different today. Your shadow, it seems to have grown deeper. How peculiar." There was no answer. They continued to sail in silence for a while. Slowly, the fog receded, revealing a black shore. The skeleton changed the course of the boat and let it drift until its bottom scraped against the rock. There he let go of the oar and sighed. "This is it, creature. That is as far as I go." The young woman remained motionless for a while, then stood up and touched the lantern, letting the white flame travel from it to her palm. After that, she jumped onto the shore, staggered, and slowly straightened herself, looking into the darkness. Finally she spoke. "How close are we to that place?" The skeleton shrugged. "Close enough, I'd wager. Sorry for lying to you, by the way. In my defense, you only have yourself to blame, creature. Who would be foolish enough to believe that anyone can cross the underworld? This place is not for the likes of us to traverse. Getting this close to its inner border is already a miracle." He hesitated for a while, then added, "Are you sure that you want to go on? There are worse fates than death, creature. Trust me, I should know." The young woman glanced at him, then asked, "What about you? What will you do?" The skeleton laughed. "Me? Oh, I don't know. Now that I've been taken off that damned tree, there's not much time left for me to exist. Maybe I'll try to find what remains of the shadow realm to have a proper death. Maybe I'll just go back and tease Azarax for a while, one last time. That fellow was really insufferable, you know. Spending an eternity in his company was the greatest punishment of all. A piece of advice: choose your eternal companions carefully, creature." The young woman lingered for a few moments, then nodded and walked into the darkness. Her steps were steady. Then, without turning her head, she said, "Thank you, Yuri's farewell." The skeleton watched her go, and then sighed. "What a foolish abomination. Still, I wish her luck. Even though I don't know what she seeks, I hope she finds it." As the young woman walked further and further away, the light of her flame grew distant and dim. The darkness surrounded the skeleton, and the white fog flowed slowly in his direction, as if wishing to consume him. Yuri's watched the fog draw closer, and then sighed again. "She is not as foolish as me, at least." Then the white mist swallowed him, and his voice abruptly fell quiet. Soon, impenetrable darkness reigned the cold river once again. And far in the distance, a lonely spark of light continued to climb higher and higher, soon disappearing from view. End of Volume 4, Chain Breaker. In one of the fortified lecture halls of the Awakened Academy, a large auditorium was slowly filling up with students. These young men and women, however, did not look like inexperienced sleepers. Instead, most of them possessed the grim confidence of battle-tested veterans. They were sharp and rough around the edges, exhibiting the telltale signs of those who had just recently returned from the dream realm. For the same reason, the crowd of students was suffused with a sense of energy and liveliness typical to people who had recently brushed with death, but managed to escape its clutches alive. These were the newly awakened. Several weeks after the winter solstice, most of those who were destined to survive had already found their way to a human citadel and returned to the waking world. Now, they were settling into their new lives and responsibilities. While some chose to forge their own path, many decided to remain in the academy for a while longer. Its curriculum was not only aimed at sleepers, after all. A larger part of the complex was dedicated to continuous training of the awakened students. Just because one had survived the crucible of their first venture into the dream realm did not mean that they could stop learning after all. In fact, faced with its many challenges, most of the survivors learned one crucial lesson. No matter how prepared they were, that was never enough. Granted, the lecture that these particular young awakened were about to listen to was not from a popular course. Titled Resource Management During Prolonged Expeditions and Intercitadel Travel, the course had nothing to do with battle training or aspect proficiency. As such, it was rather obscure and unpopular. The large crowd of students had more to do with the identity of the lecturer, as opposed to the theme of the course. As an actual ascended and a person of wide renown, this star lecturer presented an irresistible attraction to the awakened students. Who was better to teach them than a person who had braved the dangers of the dream realm and slain countless nightmare creatures with their own two hands? As the time of the lecture approached, the students settled on the seats in the auditorium and waited for the lecturer to arrive. One of the last to come in was a young man in stylish civilian clothes. They were predominantly black, with subdued gray accents. The young man glanced at the young awakened, then proceeded to walk to the center of the auditorium. A few people looked at him in confusion. Instead of joining his fellow students, the young man walked to the teacher's desk and outstretched one hand. To everyone's bewilderment, he was summoning a memory. Stranger still, that memory turned out to be in the shape of an exquisite wooden chair. The strange guy put it down, then took a seat behind the desk and looked at them as if this was the most natural thing in the world. Several awakened opened their mouths to condemn his childish antics, but then hesitated. Although the eccentric student was bound to anger the lecturer with his disrespectful behavior, there was something about him that demanded attention. Another reason for their hesitation was that he was incredibly attractive. The young man was not very tall, but his slender build and stylish attire made him look very charming. With his porcelain skin and raven black hair, he looked like an exquisite doll. His striking dark eyes seemed to glint with good-natured humor. At the same time, there was something cold about them that made those who looked at the young man for too long shiver. It was as though shadows grew a little deeper around him. After a few moments, one of the young women in the first row cleared her throat and said in a friendly tone, "Hey, you better move before Master Sunless arrives. Here, there is a free seat, right next to me." The young man looked at her and smiled pleasantly. At the same time, the girl next to her whispered furiously, "What are you doing? This is Master Sunless, you idiot." The first girl slowly opened her eyes wide, then turned betrayed and raised one hand to cover her mouth in horror. A wave of whispers ran through the auditorium. "What? This is Master Sunless. But he's our age." "Of course he's our age. It took him less than 2 years to ascend. Why do you think he is famous? He's not at all like the actor who played him in the Song of Light and Darkness. The casting director must be crazy." Sonny, who listened to all that with the same pleasant smile, cleared his throat. Immediately, the students grew quiet. Good morning, awakened. I am ascended sunless. You can call me Master Sunless, or simply Master. Welcome to the first lecture of the Resource Management during Prolonged Expeditions and Intercitadel Travel course. As some of you might know, I have a tiny amount of experience with that. A few polite chuckles resounded from the audience, making him wince internally. Damn tough crowd. As this was his first day as a teacher in the academy, Sonny was unsurprisingly nervous. He would much rather fight a room full of nightmare creatures than speak in front of a room full of people. He could kill the nightmare creatures at least. Sonny paused for a moment, then said, "We will explore various topics in the course of these lectures, but first, let me ask you a question." He looked at his students and smiled. What was the biggest threat to your life in the dream realm? Overall, the lecture went better than Sonny had expected, if not for the fact that many female students had stared at him a bit too intensely. For some reason, he would have been completely comfortable teaching these young awakened. After all, he was basing the lessons on his own experience, and the students, while not as battle-hardened as him, were not amateurs themselves. Each of them had survived the first nightmare and a journey to the dream realm. So, the lecture was more of an exchange of knowledge between professionals than a traditional lesson. It was even refreshing, compared to his tutoring sessions with Rain. Although his sister was incredibly talented and hard-working, not to mention nice to be around, there were many things he simply couldn't explain to her with words. With a sigh, Sonny turned off the projector and looked at the empty auditorium. Was this his life now? 6 months had passed since the cohort returned from the second nightmare. During this time, many things happened. He had celebrated his 20th birthday just a few weeks ago. Some of the changes were good and some were bad. On the bright side, he got to spend a lot of time with Rain, teaching her how to protect herself and slowly growing closer to her. Sonny had been careful not to appear too friendly, though. He still did not want anyone, including the girl herself, to know that they were siblings. He had also spent a lot of time talking to Aiko and trying to turn the brilliant emporium into a small but thriving business. However, there was one big problem that loomed over everything he did. Ever since returning from the nightmare, Sonny was not able to enter the dream realm again. He had spent all 6 months in the safety of the waking world, and the reason for that was the strange situation he had found himself in with Clan Valor. While St. Tyrus had done everything in her power to shield Sonny and Cassie from the wrath of the Great Clan, her influence was not unlimited. The White Feather clan itself got into hot water with their overlords. From what Sonny learned, they were dismissed from ruling the Chained Island and burdened with another duty. What that duty was, he did not know. Both Cassie and he would have fared poorly if they remained awakened. However, their ascension changed things substantially and gave them more room to bargain. If before the great clans would have been inclined to make them disappear, now they were more careful in their approach. Which did not mean that everything was fine. The issue was too nuanced and sensitive to be solved quickly. So the preparations for the negotiations took a lot of time. For the time being, both of them had to protect themselves. Things were much worse for Cassie, who seemed more complicit in Mordred's escape. After all, she had requested to be stationed in the Night Temple, only to leave after a while and return, causing the disaster. Since no one except for St. Tyrus knew about Sonny's clash with Mirror Beast, it was easy to believe that Cassie had come in contact with the imprisoned prince during her stay in the Citadel, and then orchestrated his escape, or that she had this goal in mind from the very beginning. As the result, things turned a bit ugly for the Fire Keepers. After a couple of them disappeared, the rest took shelter in the Ebony and Ivory Towers, where the ocean of divine flames and the crushing protected them from any threat. They rarely returned to the waking world to avoid problems. Sonny was on the opposite side of things. Thanks to Master Jet, he enjoyed a bit of protection from the government. Since the great clans had a lot of influence in the dream realm but were not as powerful in the waking world, he was advised to remain there for a while, which meant that he could enjoy some peace and quiet for a bit. It also meant that he could not hunt the nightmare creatures and saturate his cores, unless a gate suddenly opened nearby. This was a problem. After the seed of nightmare had been destroyed, something unexpected happened. A gateway took its place, turning the ivory tower into a citadel. At the same time, the dream realm anchors of the cohort members shifted, becoming tied to it. Masters did not have to travel to another world every time they slept, but they still needed a gateway to return to reality. Changing an anchor was as easy as making use of another gateway, but there lay the problem. The only way to leave their new citadel was to either brave the crushing, somehow, or to go through the portal to the ebony tower and rise from the depths of the sky below on the flying ship. While that made the ivory tower incredibly safe, it also meant that there were no nightmare creatures around for them to hunt. There was no point for Sunny to go to the dream realm at all, especially after he had explored Hope's former prison, finding nothing of particular interest inside. It also meant that Mordred was most likely tied to the same gateway. However, the Prince of Nothing had never shown himself. Either he had found a way to change his anchor, or he had chosen to remain in the waking world as well. In any case, there was no safe way for Sunny to collect shadow fragments in the dream realm. He was also cut from his main source of memories, which he had hoped to put on sale through the Emporium. At first, Sunny was very unhappy with this situation. He was both much stronger and still far behind Nephi's in terms of raw power. Even though there was a vast gap of 2 ranks between them now, his soul lusted to grow even more. He could never have enough strength, never be powerful enough to protect himself and those he cared about from the vicissitudes of life. He was still too weak to challenge fate. But after a few days of peaceful life in the waking world, Sunny had started to slowly change his mind. In the past 3 years, his power had grown tremendously and at a breakneck pace. While that was extremely beneficial overall, there was a negative side to such speed. His foundation had turned unstable. He had been so preoccupied with gaining more power, more strength, deeper insight, greater understanding, that he had not spent enough time actually assimilating all these gains into a coherent whole. Internalizing and absorbing all the lessons he had learned into his very bones was very important, yet he had neglected it for the lack of time and opportunity. He needed time to truly make the vast power he had won his own. Additionally, there was something else that concerned Sunny, his mental state. Ever since he had been infected by the nightmare spell at 16, his psyche had been subjected, sometimes by the circumstances, and sometimes through his own volition, to incredible abuse. Sunny prided himself on the fact that he never broke, no matter what ghastly horror and gruesome agony he had to endure. And there had been plenty. However, he also never forgot the conversation he had with Master Jet on the way to Shadow Blade Kurt's execution. He knew that awakened, no matter how great and powerful they seemed, were also the most likely to crack. The nightmares they brought back from the dream realm haunted them, and many succumbed to the relentless strain. Sunny had been gutted, beheaded, and burned. He had watched friends die or be left behind. The amount of torturous pain he had gone through could only compare to the amount of mental anguish he had experienced. The Red Colosseum, the nightmares, and all the rest, it was enough to crush a dozen people. And yet, he still stood tall. But for how long? While Sunny considered himself to be a resilient person, maybe even incredibly so, he was not prideful enough to think that he was better than every other human out there. Would his soul and mind continue to remain strong if he continued to carelessly abuse them, or would small cracks appear on their surfaces? Maybe there were countless cracks on them already. In the end, he had decided that taking a break to consolidate his foundation and give his mind time to heal was worth it. The situation with Clan Valor, while unpleasant, was not critical. It just demanded time and caution. Slowly but surely, the sides were going to come to an understanding and find a compromise through negotiations. As masters of considerable renown, Sonny and Cassie had enough influence and weight to reach a favorable outcome in these negotiations, especially because 50 of the most promising awakened of their generation were following Song of the Fallen. He was going to use the time before that happened to his benefit. So, although the past 6 months had not exactly been exciting for Sonny, they had been very fruitful. He had spent a lot of time practicing his combat skills and shadow dance, properly assimilating everything that he had learned to elevate his mastery of battle to a new level. He also had to relearn a lot of things to adjust to his new power as a master, and adjust all his techniques to this new, incredible reality. One of the more valuable discoveries he made during this time was that the inherent problem he had been struggling with, the threat of losing himself to the formlessness of shadow dance, was easily remedied by a simple thought exercise. He just had to remember his true name. No matter how far gone he was, it always brought him back. Apart from that, every single aspect of Sonny's combat ability was vastly improved by his newly profound control of shadow essence, as well as the time he had taken to fully absorb all of his rich battle experience. Battle techniques were not the only thing he trained, though. He also dove deep into the intricacies of shadow manifestation, first learning how to properly wield it, and then leveraging his cunning and creativity to push its uses to their limits. His new ability was an incredibly versatile one, so there was a lot he could do with it. Not only did it have the potential to be powerful on its own, it could also be weaved into every other facet of his battle performance in unexpected and insidious ways. Almost every day, Sonny discovered something new he could do. The possibilities were simply limitless. That limitlessness, however, was its own problem. Just because Sonny could do a lot did not mean that it was wise to do it. So, it took a lot of time to find the most effective and efficient ways to use shadow manifestation. Slowly but surely, his arsenal of true and tested tricks and methods grew. He practiced each one until they became as instinctive as his combat techniques, so that he could use them without wasting even a split second on thinking about and concentrating on the desired result. Lastly, there was sorcery. After the initial breakthrough he had made in the nightmare, Sonny spent a lot of time widening the scope of his understanding of spellweave. This was perhaps the most unassailable and tough field of expertise he was trying to study, since there was nothing and no one to teach him how to do it. The scope and complexity of the subject were boundless, and all he could do was blindly stumble in the darkness, learning tiny bits through trial and error. It did not help that he could only experiment with memories, which were a rare and finite resource to him. Sonny worked around that limitation somewhat by turning mundane things into memories and experimenting on them instead. However, that produced its own obstacle. He needed soul shards to do so, and soul shards were very expensive in the real world. And he could not procure them in the dream realm, for now. To solve his resource problem, Sonny turned to the only source available to him, the merit points provided by the government, which could then be exchanged for various valuable things. To get points and fund his research, he had compiled another paper with the help of teacher Julius. The exploration report on Chained Isles, by Ascended Sunless, did not produce as big of a ripple among the general public, but caused a real explosion in the awakened academia. The data about all the ancient nightmare creatures, the culture, and the bizarre nature of the Kingdom of Hope was a true boon to the collective knowledge base of humanity. Sonny, of course, kept the most sensitive pieces of information to himself, but just what remained brought him vastly more contribution points than the report on the Forgotten Shore. Information from nightmares was 10 times more valuable after all, since very few people ever challenged them, and even fewer returned alive. These contribution points, as well as other benefits and privileges he had become entitled to as a master, allowed him to not only pour his mind and soul into studying sorcery, but also kept the brilliant emporium functioning without a constant influx of his hunting trophies. Sadly, even that was not enough. And hence, Sonny found himself teaching young awakened at the academy. While that was not the best and most efficient way for a master to earn, it was still rather profitable for someone in his situation. Sitting in the empty auditorium, Sonny sighed and looked at his communicator. A pale smile appeared on his face. She must be already here. Today was a special day for more than one reason. A few days prior, Master Jet had suddenly contacted him. This was not too strange, since they interacted often in these past 6 months, but this time, something about Soul Reaper's voice sounded a bit off. Not exactly bad, just different. She had told him that she had some good news and some bad news, and requested a face-to-face meeting to discuss an important issue. That meeting was about to take place at the instructor's cafeteria. Shaking his head, Sonny stood up, dismissed his chair, and walked to the door. I wonder what Master Jet has to say. Gods, was there really a need for all this mystery? She made it sound as if the world is ending. Now that Sonny was a teacher at the academy, he was very much looking forward to gaining access to the instructor's cafeteria. He remembered the last time he had eaten there in perfect detail. The food was simply to die for. It might have been one of the major reasons why he had accepted the job of a lecturer, to be honest. No, it wasn't. I'm not that shallow. Walking inside, Sonny glanced at the tasteful interior, gaining a new appreciation for the wooden furnishings. By now, he was not shocked every time he saw natural wood in the waking world. However, this was not just any wood. If he remembered correctly, all this lumber came from the corpse of a slain titan. A titan killed by the great clan Valor, to be precise. Perhaps even by Anvil himself. What irony it was to enjoy a dinner on one of the cafeteria's tables while being secretly hunted by the people who provided the titanic lumber for its creation. With a sigh, Sonny looked around and noticed a familiar face. An exquisitely beautiful woman in a deep blue uniform sat in the corner of the cafeteria, cradling a cup of coffee in her hands. He confidently walked over and sat down across from her. Master Jet. Soul Reaper, Jet looked up from her cup and smiled at him. Master Sunless. Well, that sounds weird. He shifted uncomfortably, not accustomed to being addressed that way, at least not by her. Although the two of them were technically of the same rank now, Jet was still older than him. The gap between them had grown much smaller, but he still felt a lot of respect for her. Looking at his fellow Ascended, Sonny suddenly frowned. Master Jet looked different today. He was accustomed to her usual, slightly unkempt and careless appearance. However, the person in front of him looked like nothing if not an exemplary officer. Her uniform was perfectly ironed and buttoned all the way, with not a single crease or blemish marring its surface. Her silver epaulets were glistening with a polished sheen. Her leather boots were freshly shined. Her raven-black hair was perfectly arranged, and her icy blue eyes were sharp and piercing. He raised an eyebrow. You look nice. Jet's smile widened. Oh, this? I had to attend a special ceremony in the morning. Promotions are flying off the shelves in the government these days. Sonny cleared his throat. Congratulations, I guess. Soul Reaper laughed, then pushed a small alloy box toward him. No, congratulations to you. Happy belated birthday. He blinked a couple of times, then opened the box and looked at the glimmering soul shard that lay inside. His eyes sparked when he recognized its ascended rank. Ah, this is exactly what I needed. Thank you so much. But isn't it too luxurious? A shard like that cost a lot. Master Jet shrugged. Perks of being a public servant. I have more access to such things than most. She grew silent and looked at him expectantly. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, the ascended beauty sighed. What no present for me. I recently turned 30, you know. Sunny froze, then chuckled awkwardly. Oh, well, in that case, dinner is on me. Soul Reaper seemed more than happy with that arrangement. Ah, you know me too well, Sunny. In that case, don't mind if I do. Some time later, they finished their food and leaned back on their seats in satisfaction. Master Jet took a sip of coffee and smiled. Credit where credit is due. You Academy people really know how to treat your staff. I am regretting my choice of career a little. Her voice trailed off a little, and a wistful expression appeared on her face. Then, she shook her head and finally addressed the true reason why they met today. Good news first. You can relax, Sonny. Valor seems to finally be ready to behave reasonably, so the worst part is over. He inhaled deeply. At last, what changed? Master Jet shrugged. Well, a lot of things. But mainly, they just don't have the energy to pursue small matters anymore. The tension between the great clans seems to be growing, so Valor elders have a lot on their plate. That plays in your favor because you and your cohort have managed to make yourself valuable. With Saint Tyrus advocating on your behalf, everything is ready for a sincere and friendly negotiation. Sunny frowned. Sincere, friendly. What about the fire keepers that disappeared? You might have not noticed, but the survivors of the Forgotten Shore are a tight group. To them, this is not a small matter. She smiled. They are alive, although maybe not well. Their release is one of the points you and Song of the Fallen will have to negotiate. However, I don't foresee any problems with that. As long as you told the truth and neither of you had conscious plans of assisting that mysterious prisoner of theirs in the escape, everything should be fine. A dark expression appeared on Sunny's face. Master Jet knew the general situation, but not the details. The problem they had with the great clan Valor was very simple. Although Sunny and Cassie had caused a great deal of harm to the clan's interests, because of the lack of witnesses and Saint Tyrus volunteering to act as the scapegoat, that by itself was not something intolerable. However, the crux of the matter was that no one in the great clan knew if their actions had been simply the result of a misfortunate happenstance, or premeditated. What Master Jet had just told him meant that Valor was ready to abandon their hostile paranoia and accept the version of events where neither Sunny nor Cassie had helped Mordred escape willingly, as well as grant them an unofficial pardon. With the White Feather clan taking the responsibility for the death of Saint Cormac, that would leave them in the clear. However, although the great clan knew that Mordred had escaped as the result of their actions, no one except for the members of the cohort knew that he had followed them into the nightmare. If the fact that the five of them had become masters together ever came into the light, then, no matter what the truth was, no one would believe that the bastard simply manipulated them all. They would all think that Sunny and Cassie were his willing allies. So this secret had to remain buried forever. Sunny grimaced. So what do they want? Master Jet shrugged. I can't say really, but you have to be ready to make some concessions. Valor will probably insist on recruiting you to their side, at least in some capacity. Whether you manage to resist their forceful invitation or not depends on you. She thought for a bit and then added, what works in your favor is that you, Song of the Fallen, Nightingale, and Raised by Wolves are a package deal, as far as everyone is concerned. Valor might have ambitions of making all of you their asset, but they will probably be satisfied by ensuring that none of you becomes entangled with their opponents. Recruiting just one would make it so that the rest would not join the opposite side. A deep scowl appeared on Sunny's face. Are you telling me that we will have to sell one of us to Clan Valor? Master Jet smiled. You make it sound as if becoming a member of a great clan is something horrible. Most awakened would kill for such a chance, you know. Granted, you will never be treated as a true-blood descendant, but that does not mean that they won't shower you with resources and opportunities. Probably. Sunny remained silent for a while, then sighed. I know, but I need to think about it. She took a sip of coffee, then leaned back. Well, think fast. He looked at the beautiful ascended with a dark expression and asked in a low tone. And why is that? Master Jet grinned. Well, because the representative of Valor will be here tomorrow. Your friend Cassie is coming back to the waking world too. You will meet here in the academy as its neutral ground. So, you have until tomorrow morning to prepare for the negotiations, Sunny. Good luck. Sunny remained silent for a few moments, then scowled. What do you mean, good luck? Aren't you going to be there to mediate the negotiations? Master Jet took a sip of her coffee, then shook her head. No, while the government often serves as a neutral party and the connective tissue between the great clans, this is not one of those cases. Besides, I simply can't. I am being transferred out of the city. This is my last day here for a while. He stared at her, dumbfounded. Master Jet was not going to be around anymore. Sunny suddenly felt a pang of discomfort. He had grown accustomed to her being present out there somewhere. Not exactly close to him, but at the same time within reach. Noticing the expression on his face, she sighed. Actually, that is the second thing I wanted to talk to you about. The bad news. Soul Reaper casually looked around, then summoned a memory that looked like a music box. Immediately, a dome of silence appeared around them, cutting off all outside noises. Sunny frowned, confused by the need for secrecy. She had seemed to be perfectly fine discussing private matters of a great clan in the public. What could have been more sensitive than that? Master Jet lingered for a moment, then said, To be honest, Sunny, I was not going to have this conversation with you, at least not yet. But since the situation changed, and the things we are going to talk about can affect the decisions you will make tomorrow, I decided that there is no point in postponing it. He shifted uncomfortably. That is very suspenseful. What is the matter? She smiled, then activated her communicator and summoned a projection. It showed a map of something that looked like a big chunk of the dream realm. Sunny saw a lot of water and several large landmasses, each no smaller than the Forgotten Shore by the looks of it. However, no matter how he looked, he could not find the familiar landmarks. The Hollow Mountains, Bastion, Ravenheart. Either he was not as proficient at reading maps as he had thought, or he had never seen this land. Slightly confused, he glanced at Master Jet and asked, Is that a previously unexplored region of the Dream Realm? She looked at him with a strange expression, then coughed. No, that is planet Earth, you dummy. Sunny froze in embarrassment, then looked at the image again. Oh right, I am an idiot. Soul Reaper grinned. Sunny, are you one of those awakened that know more about the dream realm than about the waking world? He cleared his throat. Well, it's not like I spent a lot of time in school, you know. Her grin dimmed a little. Right, sorry. Sometimes I forget how young you are. It took me a while to cover the basics after leaving the outskirts as well. Master Jet sighed, then pointed to the map. In any case, this is our world. As you can see, it is not in great shape. A few centuries ago, it looked very different. There were around 12 billion people living across it. A few million even found their way to the moon, eventually. She sighed, then added, But now there's barely 3 billion of us left, and we only populate 4 of the 7 continents. Do you know which continent we are currently on? What our city is called? Sunny looked at her with a dark expression. I am not a complete fool, you know. We are in Asia, and the city is called, wait, it has a name. I just thought it's called, the city. She rolled her eyes. Well, you are half right. We are indeed in Asia, which is one of the 4 populated continents and one that shelters the most people. The city we live in is the largest and most populous city left on Earth. It is also the industrial, military, and administrative heart of humanity. Around 1/10 of all humans live here. That is why, while it is technically called the Northern Quadrant Siege Capital, or NQSC, people usually just refer to it as the city. Master Jet hesitated for a moment, then said with a hint of darkness in her voice, "Most of the surface of the planet is either uninhabitable or overrun by nightmare creatures, so megacities are the most convenient way to sustain a large population. However, even with spelltech and modern science, they are not capable of sustaining everyone. Hence the outskirts, where around 20% of the total city population is offloaded to slowly die out of the sight of the rest of humanity. But that is neither here nor there." She sighed and then pointed to a continent directly connected to Asia. This pit of desolation used to be known as Europe. It was turned completely unsuited for human life long before the spell appeared. Her finger trailed across a large body of water. "This is North America. We lost it not long before you were born when a Category 5 gate opened there. That was a big disaster. Because of its proximity to the gate, South America was mostly abandoned as well. Now, we only maintain a small presence in its southernmost part. Those settlements are incredibly important, however, because that is where most of our food is produced." Master Jet hesitated for a bit, and then gestured to a large archipelago situated below South America. "This is Antarctica, the second most populated continent after Asia and the logistical link between the rest of the continents, connecting both hemispheres together. Believe it or not, before the dark times, it was covered in ice. Actually, the melting of all that ice was one of the reasons that caused the dark times." She sighed. "The sea levels across the planet rose, drowning many cities and displacing billions of people. The percentage of the landmass that was devoured by water was not too radical, but the problem was that many civilization centers were situated along the coasts. With all of them gone and billions of refugees seeking shelter, the global infrastructure collapsed. It did not happen in an instant, of course, but quite fast. That is the danger of building a deeply interconnected society. Lack of self-sufficiency is perfectly fine and even beneficial during the good times, but makes civilizations vulnerable to cascade failure." Soul Reaper looked at him with a grim expression. "Which was exactly what happened. The worse things got, the more chaos there was, and the more chaos there was, the worse things got. Endless natural disasters, destruction of global infrastructure, and resource starvation led to an escalating series of wars. Orbital kinetic strikes, nuclear warfare, chemical warfare, biowarfare. In the end, everything was being used. The planet was already in bad shape, and this was almost the last straw. In the end, the terribly reduced population achieved some form of stability, and that was when the nightmare spell appeared." Master Jet shook her head. But I am getting off topic. The point is, almost all of humanity resides around the Indian Ocean today. Asia, Antarctica, Africa, and Australia are the 4 remaining bastions of our civilization, forming the northern, southern, western, and eastern quadrants. Sonny listened to the impromptu lecture with interest. He knew bits and pieces of human history, of course, but mostly from them being referenced in popular culture and government propaganda, which were more often than not one and the same. Out there in the outskirts, people did not need to know a lot about the world, because their world started and ended in the outskirts. Even the city proper seemed like a distant land. He would have had more general knowledge, of course, if he had attended school, but Sonny's formal education more or less ended when he was 7. Honestly, the fact that he knew that people lived on the outside of the planet as opposed to on the inside was already an achievement. He had managed to become a teacher despite all that, had he not? Still, I probably should start educating myself on matters not having to do with the nightmare spell, now that I have the chance. There are plenty of people as ignorant as me, of course, but still, this is kind of embarrassing. Sonny looked at Jet and shifted slightly. Thanks for the history lesson, Master Jet. But what does it have to do with anything? She leaned back, smiled calmly, and answered in a relaxed tone. Oh, it's very simple, really. These 4 bastions of humanity I mentioned, they're about to become 3. Master Jet's nonchalant attitude was in stark contrast with the gravity of her statement. Sonny froze for a few moments, then slowly put his cup on the table. When he spoke, his voice sounded a little hoarse. What? She sighed, then looked around the cafeteria. It was slightly surreal to be discussing something that concerned the lives of hundreds of millions of people in the safety of this tranquil place. Several instructors were enjoying their meals, and there were members of the staff going about their business. None of them knew of the approaching disaster. This contradiction was chilling, too. Soul Reaper did not seem to mind. I have told you about the Obel scale once, right? It is a very complicated spell-tech system that the government uses to predict the appearance of gates across the globe. Well, I was not entirely honest when I said that a bit of maintenance and calibration would solve all the problems it had been experiencing recently. In truth, the problems we've been having with its readings are not as trivial as I implied. They are just a symptom of a much bigger problem. Sonny's eyes widened slightly. Kurt, Shadow Blade Kurt. He mentioned something about the Obel scale. It was the reason he had given up and gone mad, one of them at least. Master Jet nodded, an expression of mild contempt appearing on her face. Yes, however, Kurt was broken and weak. He really blew the issue out of proportion. The corner of Sonny's mouth twitched. I wouldn't call losing an entire continent a small issue. She shrugged. Neither would I, but it is not the end of the world either. Soul Reaper calmly took a sip of coffee. Back when we lost North America, something similar happened. The Obel scale went out of alignment, making its detection scope unreliable. In the end, a Category 5 gate appeared, and after that, everything went back to normal. However, a few years ago the government noticed growing irregularities in the readings again. After studying these irregularities for some time, we came to the conclusion that something massive was going to happen again. She pursed her lips. This time, it is going to be different. Instead of one gargantuan gate, there is going to be a chain reaction of sorts. Hundreds of smaller gates are going to open in relatively quick succession, allowing countless nightmare creatures to invade the real world, and all that is going to take place. A moment of tense silence passed before she finished the sentence. In Antarctica. Sonny felt his mouth turn dry. But you just said that Antarctica is the second most populated continent on Earth. Master Jet nodded. Yes, there are around 900 million people living there. He remained motionless for a while, then looked away. You also said that a compartmentalized global infrastructure is vulnerable to cascade failure, and that Antarctica serves as a logistical hub between the 4 continents in South America, where most of our food is produced. Soul Reaper smiled. Indeed. However, it is not as bad as you might think. Every megacity possesses robust hydroponic agriculture and is capable of sustaining itself to a large degree. We've learned our lessons. Yes, losing the connection to South America will be a painful blow, but humanity will survive. There will be a big change, of course. I think you have already guessed its nature. More people will be pushed out into the outskirts. Maybe there will be 30% of the population living there instead of 20, maybe more. Sonny still could not let go of his dismay. What about the millions of people living in Antarctica? What is the government doing? Can't you throw enough troops and awaken there to contain the chain reaction? She hesitated for a few moments, then let out a wistful sigh. Sure, if we mobilize all our forces, and I mean all of them, and get the great clans to fully support the operation, we might keep hold of Antarctica. However, it is not that simple. Everything has a cost, Sonny. There are 3 other continents we have to protect, and sending so many awakened into the meat grinder will leave them defenseless. After all, the fact that hundreds of gates will open in Antarctica does not mean that they will stop appearing everywhere else. Overextending our resources to protect one quadrant will doom all of them. Even if that doesn't happen immediately, in the long term, humanity will cease to exist on Earth. Master Jet rubbed her face, then smiled. That does not mean that we are going to remain idle, however. In fact, the government has been preparing a massive operation for the past 2 years. It's just that the situation changed much quicker than anyone could have expected. The timetable has been brought forward by several years at least. Our current preparations are entirely insufficient. She grew silent, then added in a neutral tone. We thought that there would be much more time to get everything ready, but there isn't, not anymore. So, it's going to be a damn mess of epic proportions. Sonny scowled, not entirely sure what that was supposed to mean. He could barely accept the fact that losing one of the 4 continents was an acceptable price for keeping the other 3 intact. Humanity had already lost North America, after all, and persisted despite the loss. It had arguably grown more powerful as the result. But if the government was willing to let nightmare creatures conquer Antarctica, what operation could it be possibly planning? What exactly is the government going to do? Master Jet turned back to the map of the Earth, lingered for a few moments, and then pointed at the large archipelago in the south. Why, what else? We are going to evacuate 900 million people from the doomed continent while a never-ending horde of nightmare creatures is pursuing us. Or, we will try at least. To be honest, I think that most of those who try will probably die. Master Jet studied the map for a few moments, and then traced a line across the ocean that lay between the 4 continents. Then, she suddenly asked, "Do you know a lot about seafaring, Sonny?" He slowly shook his head. "As much as the next guy, I guess." She smiled. Understandable. In truth, navigating the oceans is not an easy task. If it was, we could have just used the Pacific or the Atlantic to transport food from South America, but trying to sail them is pure suicide for now. Soul Reaper leaned back and took a sip of coffee. Most of our planet is covered by water, and most of that water is infested with dreadful nightmare creatures. That is because most gates open underwater. And since we have very few methods of battling them below the sea, and very little reason to, we just leave those gates be. Humanity might still hold 4.5 continents, but we have surrendered all of Earth's oceans to the enemy. She sighed, then dejectedly shook her head. Still, no civilization can exist without efficient transportation, and shipping cargo across water has been the mainstay of transportation since the dawn of time. So, we maintain a presence in the Indian Ocean. Navigating it is not easy, however, because there are unspeakable and uncountable horrors dwelling in the depths. Sonny hesitated for a moment, then asked with a bit of curiosity, "Wouldn't it be easier to ship stuff through space then?" Soul Reaper grimaced. "It is not cost-efficient. Getting to orbit requires considerable resource commitment, more so with heavy cargo, and resources are something we desperately lack. Plus, space is rife with its own dangers." Sonny raised an eyebrow. "What dangers?" She simply shrugged. "That is above even my pay grade, so I don't know. Suffice it to say that simply maintaining a scattering of satellites that support the network and the obel scale is already a dire challenge. Whether you like it or not, water is the only way." He frowned. "So how do we manage to make use of the ocean if it's so dangerous?" Master Jet smiled. "Ah well, the answer is pretty simple, House of Night." Sonny blinked a couple of times. The Great Clan. She nodded. The representatives of the House of Night excel in guiding ships through turbulent waters. They are not called Nightwalkers just to honor the clan founder, after all. To move across the ocean, convoys that consist of massive, heavily armored ships employ the services of Nightwalker navigators. Sonny leaned back, thinking. He knew a bit about the third and the least prominent Great Clan, but not too much. Unlike Valor and Song, which resembled most legacy clans and had originated from a single family, House of Night was born from an alliance of several prominent clans. They resided in a dire region of the dream realm known as Stormsea and controlled one of the three great citadels, which, as far as he knew, resembled a giant ship and was most likely left behind by one of the seven demons. Sonny also knew that the House of Night did not possess a sovereign of their own. Anvil of Valor and Kai Song ruled their families, but Asterion was seemingly not related and had nothing to do with the third great clan. It was not clear why the other two powers did not consume the weaker one. Now that Sonny learned of the pivotal role Nightwalkers played in sustaining human civilization, he guessed that they simply offered too much utility to be pressured into submission. Alternatively, the nature of the region they controlled might have simply been too hazardous for either Valor or Song to invade, or their existence created a bit of much-needed balance and deterrence between the two dominant great clans. What was clear, however, was that the House of Night was deeply connected to Storm God. There were just too many coincidences between their powers and the deity of depths, oceans, darkness, stars, travel, guidance, and disaster. Did Nightwalkers bear the lineage of Storm God? That would certainly explain a lot. Master Jet, meanwhile, continued. The scions of the House of Night allow naval convoys to reach their destinations, which is both a blessing and a curse. The problem with that situation is that, while there are more Nightwalkers than there are descendants of the other two great clans, their number is still limited. And so, the number of convoys we can operate simultaneously is limited, as well. She sighed. We can only evacuate people across water. By our calculations, it will take at least 2 years to evacuate the population of Antarctica that way. That is even if we commit the bulk of our navy to the operation. However, her voice grew dim. The chain reaction is going to start in a few months at most. It won't be too severe at the beginning, but quickly ramp up, drowning the entire archipelago in nightmare creatures. Sonny remained silent for a bit, then asked, "So what is going to happen?" Master Jet finished her coffee and offered him a smile. "Well, the government is going to transfer a very substantial part of its forces to Antarctica. Pretty much everyone who can be spared without leaving the rest of humanity completely defenseless will be transferred to the expeditionary force. They will try to stall the nightmare creatures for as long as possible to allow as many people as we can save to escape. Oh, also, I will be on one of the first ships myself." Sonny looked away, not knowing what to say. Master Jet herself had judged that many of those who were going to take part in the evacuation would not be coming back. Still, she was Soul Reaper Jet, was she not? Surely, she of all people was going to be okay. Master Jet sighed, then looked around once again. Then she said calmly, "Of course, that will never be enough. In a couple of months, the government will announce a voluntary mobilization, both among the awakened and among mundane humans. Many people will answer the call, while most will not. As I've said, the loss of Antarctica is not a world-ending event. Dying there is not really worth it." Sonny gritted his teeth. "So why are you going? With your position, I am sure that you could have chosen to stay behind. Did you let the propaganda get to your head? Honor, duty, and sacrifice. Do you actually believe in that crap?" Soul Reaper laughed. "No, I am as cynical as you, Sonny. However, I have my own reasons." She lingered for a few moments, and then added in a suddenly serious tone, And I think that you might understand my reasoning very well. We've known each other for a while, Sonny, and I always shied away from giving you the recruitment speech. However, times have changed. So tomorrow, when the representative of valor tries to invite you into their great and illustrious clan, I want you to refuse." She leaned forward, looked him in the eyes, and added, "Instead, I want you to leave everything behind, enlist, and come with me." It was hard not to get swept up in Master's yet cool presence. However, Sonny was not so easy to sway. He held her gaze for a few moments, then turned away. His expression grew somber. "You just spent a lot of time convincing me that losing Antarctica would not cause irreparable damage to humanity, and that most of those who go there would end up dead. And now, you suddenly want me to go as well. Why would I?" Sure, fighting a noble and glorious war against the nightmare creatures sounded exciting. But Sonny was not an inexperienced kid anymore. He knew the price of glory all too well. To him, war casualties were not an abstract concept, but instead a very familiar and grim reality. He was not arrogant and ignorant enough to consider himself immune to death. Master Jet leaned back. "Don't you want to defend your fellow humans?" Sonny shrugged. "Don't get me wrong. I really want all those people in Antarctica to survive. However, none of them helped me when I was starving to death in the outskirts. None of them were there when I was drowning in my own blood on the forgotten shore. The government didn't do crap to uplift me either." He frowned and then added, "In fact, one might argue that the government not only abandoned me entirely, but even did everything in its power to make sure that I die swiftly after being used up to bring it a tiny bit of benefit, like my parents did. But despite all that, I survived and managed to build a decent life for myself. And now that I finally have something good going for me, you want me to throw it all away and go risk my life to maybe save a bunch of strangers?" Master Jet sighed. "I get it, trust me I do, but—" Sonny raised his eyebrows. "But what? I do believe that you get it. You are from the outskirts yourself, after all. Maybe your life there was not as bad as mine, but it wouldn't have been too different. So why are you going to Antarctica?" She lingered for a few moments, then looked away. "I guess it's hard to explain. Honor, duty, sacrifice, you're right, those words don't mean much to me. Working for the government is a means to an end. However, I do work for the government, and I take pride in my work." Soul Reaper studied the visitors of the cafeteria with her icy blue eyes, then glanced at Sonny. "I might not have a lot of affection for humanity, but maintaining the fragile balance that allows it to exist is something that I chose to make my responsibility, my domain. So, watching Antarctica go up in flames from the sidelines would be against my professional sensibility." Sonny remained silent for a while, thinking about what she said. He felt that, in a sense, Master Jet was very much like him. Too stubborn to give up, unwilling to let the world have its way. However, there was a big difference between them. While Sonny aimed all that spite and resentment at surviving and elevating only himself, she had chosen something much grander as her target. Instead of going it alone, Soul Reaper had decided to tie herself down to a much bigger hole. Was it worth it? He did not know for sure, but felt that it wasn't. People like him and her deserved to be selfish. The world had never treated them well, and so they had no obligation to return the favor. Dying for someone you did not care about was utter foolishness. He looked at her and said darkly, "But I am not in the same profession as you." Master Jet smiled. "True, however, I wasn't finished. My work ethic is only part of the reason why I am going to Antarctica. The other is the future." Sonny raised an eyebrow. "The future?" She nodded. "Yes, the world is changing, Sonny. What happens in Antarctica might not end humanity or even change it too much, but it will change the awakened. Think about it, with so many of us going, either as part of the initial force or as volunteer reinforcements, the power balance of the awakened society will shift. Thousands will die, but those who survive will grow stronger. Soul Reaper leaned forward, her voice suddenly intense. How many will fully saturate their cores? How many will achieve a breakthrough in their combat skill? How many will ascend? There are less than 1,000 masters alive in the world right now. How many will there be after the battle for Antarctica? I'd wager much more than that. How many new saints will emerge? Everything will shift, Sonny. You can either be a part of that shift or be left behind. Sonny studied her face for a few moments and shrugged. Then, he asked in a somber tone, "Are you hopping to become a saint in all the chaos, while all the great clans are looking elsewhere?" Master Jet sighed, then slowly shook her head. "No, not really. You are mistaken if you think that their monopoly on transcendence exists only through preventative measures. Even if you become a saint, they still can and will make you disappear. Plus, entering the third nightmare is not something that can be done in the heat of the moment. If you want to survive, you need years of preparation and an ocean of resources, not to mention a powerful and cohesive cohort. Jumping into a random seed will just get you killed." Sonny remained silent for a bit, then scowled. What are the great clans doing about this situation anyway? The House of Night is supplying its navigators for the Navy. Are they going to join the ground forces as well? What about Song and Valor? Soul Reaper grimaced and shook her head. No, the great clans are staying clear from the ground operation for now. Maybe they will join eventually, but currently all three are withholding their forces. His face grew dark. Why isn't protecting human lives the purpose for their existence? She sighed. It is, and they are. They just have their own thoughts on what that implies. Master Jet hesitated for a few moments, and then added, "The great clans have given up on Earth a long time ago, Sonny, instead of trying to protect humanity's old home from falling apart. They set their gazes at building a new one. They have big plans for the dream realm." Sonny left the academy with a lot on his mind. As a master and a high-ranking citizen, he had the right to acquire a PTV license and more than enough money to purchase one. However, Sonny had no idea how to control a personal transport vehicle and was too lazy to learn, so he still used public trains to move around the city. Around the Northern Quadrant siege capital. Paying no attention to the captivated glances people threw at him, he looked into the window as the train slid forward on its magnetic guideway, flying through district after district with incredible speed. The city was a nice enough place, as long as you were not born in the outskirts. Tall buildings burrowed deep underground and rose high into the sky, connected by tunnels and aerial bridges into a complicated maze of graphene composite and reinforced alloy. Here and there, artificial trees and grass broke the white monotony with vibrant shades of green, yellow, orange, and red. Everything seemed clean and bright despite the heavy snowstorms that were prevalent this time of year, not at all like the dirty, dim, poisonous clutter of the outskirts. There were large screens displaying beautiful vistas of breathtaking landscapes that had not existed on planet Earth since centuries ago, and propaganda projection that had been masterfully designed to brighten the mood of the citizens. Most of all, the city seemed full of life. Endless streams of people were crowding the crosswalks, with a rare PTV or two appearing from time to time. Millions, hundreds of millions of humans called this place their home. Only here, protected by the colossal outer barriers and protective air filtration systems, as well as powerful awakened, could they survive and thrive. It was strange to imagine that many similar human shelters in Antarctica were going to be abandoned and destroyed by the endless tide of nightmare creatures very soon. Sonny had seen the panic and mayhem that an unexpected manifestation of a gate could cause. However, his imagination failed when he tried to envision what the same disaster, but magnified 100-fold, would look like. All he could picture was the horde of abominations that the Dreamer army had faced under the Crimson Spire suddenly appearing on these peaceful streets. Already, that image made him shudder. However, he still stood by his words. He did not owe these people anything. Sure, if a gate opened right in front of him, Sonny would have been inclined to fight and buy the civilians time to run away. This was just human nature, but he was not going to go out of his way and seek death just to fulfill some abstract obligation. No one had helped when he had been desperate for help. He had survived despite humanity, not because of it. And he would continue to put himself first. Most likely, Sonny would have lied if he said that Master Jet did not put a seed of doubt in his heart. Sure, the expedition to Antarctica seemed like a suicidal exercise in futility, but she was right. Those who survived that ordeal were going to grow much stronger. Although Sonny would not be getting any shadow fragments from the hordes of dormant and awakened abominations that were going to flood the southern quadrant soon, he could still collect plenty of soul shards and memories, maybe even echoes. There would be more than enough of fallen nightmare creatures roaming Antarctica as well. However, he also did not believe in the government's ability to accurately predict what would happen there. They seemed to think that only lower category gates would appear during the chain reaction, but was that assessment right? Who could say with certainty that another Category 5 gate would not manifest itself instead? The last time it happened, the likes of Immortal Flame and Smile of Heaven perished in the fight. Could Sonny guarantee that he would fare any better? No, he definitely could not. In the end, it all came down to a simple choice that depended on tomorrow's negotiations. If all went well, Sonny would regain the ability to enter the dream realm. There, he would be able to achieve much better results than the expedition to Antarctica could ever provide, and with much less risk. More than that, he could even pledge allegiance to the illustrious clan Valor. By now, he had more than enough value to negotiate a supremely lucrative deal. With their training, support, and resources, becoming a Titan would not be out of the realm of possibility. The barrier that stood between him and transcendence would instantly disappear, too. Instead, he would be in the best position possible to attempt conquering the third nightmare. Perhaps he would even be able to enhance his understanding of sorcery by leaps and bounds. Valor was widely renowned for creating incredible memories, after all. He had also seen how proficient the representatives of the great clan were in using runic sorcery back in the Night Temple. There was so much knowledge that they possessed, so much he could learn from them. As for the fact that the great clans seemed to be preparing to abandon Earth in favor of the Dream Realm, were they even wrong? Sonny still remembered the conversation he had had with Effie in the ruined cathedral of the Dark City. She, too, believed that the waking world was dying, and that the dream realm could become humanity's salvation. Her argument was dreadful but compelling. In any case, if something went wrong, he would always be able to leave Clan Valor behind. Pledges of allegiance did not mean anything to Sonny, after all. As a person who abhorred the word honor, he was more than willing to betray any promise he made as long as it suited him. Deserting a great clan would probably not be easy, but by then, he was going to be powerful enough to manage. So, if negotiations went well, he had no reason to do something as stupid as following Master Jet to Antarctica. If they went poorly, however, that would be pretty much his only choice. That was why Sonny had not given Soul Reaper a definitive answer. She did not ask for one anyway. Master Jet had just told him to think about her offer and inform her of his decision during the next 2 months. As the train approached the Terrace district, Sonny sighed and headed for the exit. Damn, my head hurts. Why did all of it have to happen on the day of my first lecture? That's too much excitement for one day. Worse still, tomorrow promised to be even more exciting. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story. And if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.